Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Frank Fear. It's so good to have you with us, either live or in the archive, Mountaineer locker room, then and now. And I just lost my partner, Mickey. The tech issue. Tech's wonderful, but when it doesn't work, we all know that. It's really a challenge. But it's great to have you here on July 29th, and the clock is ticking. There's Mickey. The clock is ticking, Mick, to the football season. I can't think of a better guest tonight than John Antonik to talk about his book on Bobby Bowden and also to get us even more revved up for the season that's coming just in a few weeks. How you doing tonight, Mick?
Hey, I'm doing good, Frank. Sorry I lost you there technically for just a moment. I'm back now. Yeah, it's that time of the year when, as a player, you just can't wait to get going. You've been working out all summer. You've been doing things on your own, hopefully, uh, getting in shape, getting ready to put the pads on, and now here we are, less than just a couple of weeks away from practice starting, and got about 35 days until the first game. So, yeah, chomping at the bit, raring to go for another fantastic Mountaineer season.
Yeah, we were talking last week about the start of spring practice. I'm sure John knows if the date's set, but have you seen anything? I haven't since last week. I presume it's next week, but maybe it's not.
I think it's the 7th that it starts, Frank.
Seventh,
August the
that's great.
7th.
That's coming up. And
Yep.
so, the thing is, and you know this, everything's in cycles. And this is clearly an upcycle for WVU Mountaineers. It's great for fans, and it's not just one sport. And we'll talk with John a bit about that in a few seconds. It cuts across sports, great leadership out of athletic administration with Ren Baker, great coaches, and it's interesting about sports. There's so much on TV, so much. It's loaded. Every night you can flip the channel during the season. But that baseball team just grabbed people's hearts and thoughts all the way across the country. And what a great way to set up the 26th season. Mick, just absolutely fantastic.
Yep, looking for a big turnaround this year. Only won 2 conference games last year, a total of 4 wins. So I'm looking for us, hopefully, at least to double that number of wins. Hopefully, quadruple it in the conference and double it on our overall record and get back in the running for things.
Yeah. Well, John knows, I think, or will know, we've been doing a review of the various rooms, and we started with the rooms that need to improve if the Mountaineers are going to improve. We started last week with the wide receiver room, and that looks awfully strong. Tonight, we're going to, later in the show, talk about the offensive line, and that looks, I think, bonkers when you consider where that room has been over the last couple of years. And then next week, we'll do the defensive backfield. But before we bring John in, I'm sorry to say Greg Christ could not be with us tonight. We're going to keep our fingers crossed that Greg will be with us again next week. But as we did last week, I see that Matthew Thomas is in the back room. Let's bring Matthew in. Matthew, you rushed home to be with us. We appreciate that. Good to see you. How are things going on your end?
Frank, it is great to see you and also great to see you guys as well again. Thank you so much, Darren, once again for putting everything together. I'm super excited to be back on. And yeah, a little bit of a rush. Got back home from the grocery store, but definitely have some questions here for Mr. John. And I can't wait to ask them to you. And yeah, let's get this football season underway here in just a few months. It feels like just a few minutes. We're so ready for it to happen, but it's ready. It's going to happen. It's going to be a great season, and it's going to be a great season to be a Mountaineer wherever you may be. So let's make it happen.
Fantastic, Matthew. Good to see you. And Darren, we're going to set up to bring John in. And so why don't we, if we can, throw up the photo of the great book he just published. You can get it everywhere. He'll talk more about that. And as you're doing that, it's on Bobby Bowden, obviously, Coach Bowden and his time at West Virginia from the mid-'60s to the mid-'70s. And we're going to play a little audio tape for you, actually, of the coach talking. I believe this was the last time he was in Morgantown, and he talks about it's really the theme of John's book. It's the meaning of his time at WVU and what the people of West Virginia mean to him. It's only a minute long, but you get to hear Bobby Bowden again.
The success that we had at Florida State in football, I attribute to my being at West Virginia University for 10 years. Now look, I coached 57 years in college. The best win of all those years, wherever I coached, was right here. That was in 1975. We beat Pitt.
The snap. McKenzie kicks it. It is long enough. McKenzie kicks it. It is good. The ball game is over.
I always pictured the West Virginians tough people. That's the one thing that you can identify with West Virginia. They are tough, unspoiled people. We'll always love West Virginia, and we'll always love the people in West Virginia.
John, isn't that just it brings tears to your eyes, I'll tell you. What a great man.
Yeah, what a wonderful man. And I remember that. And Coach Bowden was a guy for the right time for West Virginia. I was thinking about this before we got on today to talk about Coach Bowden. I have probably, Frank, I don't know, 9 or 10 books that were written about Coach Bowden during his time, all of them about Florida State mostly. And of course, rightfully so, because he became a Hall of Fame coach when he coached at Florida State. I don't think what he did at West Virginia when he left here probably warrants being in the Hall of Fame. But when you think about this, and thought about this a lot, I'm 58, okay? When Bobby left here, he was 46 years old. The things that he accomplished in his life, all of the great things that he accomplished in his life happened in his late 50s, into his 60s, and into his 70s. He was the oldest coach to ever win a first national championship, and he was the oldest to win one. And so I think about that, and what a remarkable career and what a remarkable life. And it goes to show you that you can do things at any point in your life. And that's what he did.
Yeah, there's absolutely no question about him. And I think you know the story. I just sort of dumb luck. He needed someone to talk with recruits back in 71. And basically I got the call because no faculty member wanted to do it. So they tabbed the senior grad student. And having a chance to see him behind the scenes on Saturday mornings and off season, I got to know him a bit. And it's just, it's just all I can say is, sometimes the greatest things in life that happen to you are the things that you don't expect. And, having a chance to actually, who knew back then that he was going to be the great Bobby Bowden? But really, and Mickey, of course, we'll bring him here in a second, can talk about the influence that he had on his life.
Well, to your point, I don't think anybody did. And, the fascinating part about it, and I talked to, I would say, most of the coaches that coached with him. When he left West Virginia, he offered all of his assistant coaches an opportunity to go to Florida State. Only 2 of them went with him. Some of the others weren't sure he was going to succeed there because he was going to a place that was not very good. They were in a state that was dominated by Florida. You had Miami in that state. Florida State was a distant third, maybe not even third, when you think about it. And for what he was able to do there to pull them up. I remember talking to Duke Henshaw, and he said when they got there, he sat him down and he said, listen, I don't want you having me in any homes that we're recruiting Florida. If University of Florida is recruiting a prospect, I don't want to talk to him because we're not going to get him. And, he learned that lesson here at West Virginia because the same thing with Penn State. Bobby told me whenever he left West Virginia to go recruiting, The best you can do is number 2. That's the best you are starting out when you recruit, when you leave the state line. And you mentioned the recruiting part. Recruiting West Virginia was extremely difficult back then, not just because of the situation in terms of being an independent, the stadium and all that. Morgantown was inaccessible. You couldn't get to Morgantown. So a lot of these population centers, it took forever to get there. So for what he was able to do and the players that he was able to bring in without the benefits that we have today, it's incredible. And he was an incredible recruiter. He was an incredible coach. And all of that came to bear when he went to Florida State, and he had access to players, and eventually he was able to get the types of players to be able to do the things that he did. He's a terrific coach. And he, in that clip that you played, I think it's so important. West Virginia, you can win here. We've had lots of coaches that have won here, but you have to be resourceful. You have to figure out what it is that you have to do. Maybe you have to be a little bit different than the people you're playing. And I think Bobby learned that. Bobby learned how to be resourceful here. And I think something else that he learned how to have thick skin, because at the places he was before he got to West Virginia were the responsibilities that he had. If something bad happened, it wasn't Bobby's fault. It was Bill Peterson's fault at Florida State, or it was Jim Carlin's fault at West Virginia if something went bad. But when Bobby became the head coach and the offensive line wasn't blocking well, or the kicking game wasn't performing, or you didn't have enough wide receivers, or whatever the problems were, it fell on Bobby Bowden being the head coach. Those were things that he learned at West Virginia. And he did make mistakes here. There's no question. He admitted that. He had a lot of successes, but he learned from those. And I can remember when Bill Stewart had him up here to speak to his team. I can remember I was in the back of the room, and Bobby went through all the jokes that he goes through and all the things that he does. And then he turned serious and he told his players, and I'm sure Mickey probably said this too when he was coaching the West Virginia players. He said, "You cannot repeat mistakes. I cannot use you if you repeat mistakes." Bobby made some mistakes here, but he didn't repeat them when he got to Florida State.
That's right. Fantastic. Let's get, we're talking about players that played for Bobby Bowden. We got one right here. Mickey, come on in, and I'll get out of here, and you can ask your questions of John, and also make your comments about the influence that Bobby's had on your life, because he was one of those coaches that he just didn't say goodbye to you. Thank you very much. He was with you the rest of his life and your life. Did we lose the audio? I think we may have lost your audio, Mick. Oh, let's see if we can get him back on. Yeah. Well, John, you're absolutely correct. I mean, and that's really an important trait. And that's, what Rich Rod said the other day at the press conference at the Big 12. If you're not a learner, even if you coach for 29 years, you're going to do the same thing each year for 29 years. And the better coaches, I had a chance to observe, and I was a mentor on the football team at Michigan State. Nick Saban, talk about a guy that kept on evolving, never stayed put. And Bobby was that way too. So, he was dedicated to getting better.
And the thing about Coach Bowden, he mentioned this. He said wherever he was always kind of the smallest puppy in the litter. Where the places so he had to be resourceful. He had to think of ways to move the football. And I can remember when I had a couple of conversations with Jim Carlin, and Jim Carlin was pretty forthright with the things that he was looking for. He didn't know Bobby very well. And when Jim Carlin got the West Virginia job, he told me a story. He said he was sitting in a room with Bear Bryant and Bobby Dodd, and they were talking about the passing game. And this is in the mid 60s or whatnot. And he said they were talking about it like it was a disease. And so when he got the West Virginia job, he said, I'm going to go find me a guy that can throw the football, because these guys were such, established coaches. And for them to talk about that the way that they did, it left an impression on him. Jim Carlin did not know Bobby Bowden that well, not very well at all. He said he met him one time. They worked a camp. I think he might have worked the Florida State camp. And at the time, Bobby was the Florida State wide receivers coach. Coach Fred Biletnikoff wasn't even the offensive coordinator. Bobby was looking for an opportunity to advance his career. And so this job came open. He also was considering the Auburn job. And of course, Alabama is where Bobby's from. He was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. And I think the end goal for Bobby Bowden was to get back to the University of Alabama. Because when Bobby was coaching in the small schools, he would go up and he would shop for players off Bear Bryant's roster. Some of the guys that maybe weren't good enough that Bear was stockpiling back then, that maybe weren't going to play for Alabama, he could take with him wherever he went. And it's funny because I remember in one of the things that I researched, when Bobby was at the beginning of his career, even at West Virginia, he used to hum the Alabama fight song under his breath to calm his nerves. So Alabama was the end game, I think, for him up to a certain point in his career. And so he had the Auburn job and the West Virginia job. And he chose West Virginia, I think, for a couple of reasons. I think number one, because Carlin, even though he didn't know Bobby that well, was a delegator, and he hired good coaches, and he told Bobby, this offense is yours. I'm going to get out of your way. Now I'm going to manage the game, and I'm going to know what you're doing, and you got to justify the things that you do, but that's your offense. You're going to get to call the plays. You get to do that part. So that was appealing to Bobby. And I think he knew in the back of his mind that Carlin was a very ambitious guy, and that eventually he was going to probably move on. And that's what happened. So Bobby got free reign of the offense. And then eventually Jim Carlin got an offer that to move on, get south. A lot of these Southern guys, West Virginia is not South. It's not Midwest. It's not Northeast. We're kind of in the middle of them all. So that was unique. And so I think those things led to the decision to come here. And one other point I want to make about this. Bobby never coached a black player until he got to West Virginia. None of Jim Carlin's coaches coached a black player until they got to West Virginia. And if you think about Bobby Bowden today, people that talk about him, how accommodating he was to blacks, and we talked about that a little bit. I asked him about that because if Bobby is the first coach in West Virginia history to hire a black coach, Garrett Ford. He is the first coach in West Virginia history to start a black starting quarterback, Ben Williams. And he had actually a couple that played that year. So Bobby was ahead of the curve and ahead of it. And here was the guy that had never coached a black player, okay? And to add to that, came from the worst city in the country for race relations, Birmingham, Alabama. Mm-hmm. Bull Connor and the dogs and all the things that were going on in the city of Birmingham in the 1960s. And for Bobby to have the approach that he did, and, as he told me, he said, I love all people. People would ask him when he got the West Virginia job, they would say, Coach, how many black players are you going to play? How many are you going to start? And Bobby would say, I don't know. I don't count them. So I'm looking for the best players. I don't count players. That's not how I operate. Mm-hmm. And so these were all things that were kind of going on. Frank, you lived in that time. Mickey, you of course were in that time. So the things that were going on campus, the Vietnam War, women's rights, integration, all of these things that were happening around college campuses. And here was the guy that was able to navigate it all and navigate a university it was pretty drama-free compared to a lot of schools around in the region at that time.
Absolutely. Mick, are you back with us? I hope.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you replace
Hello?
me. Go ahead, Mick.
All right. I'm back. Sorry about that. I'm having some technical difficulties here for some reason. But just to piggyback on what John was saying there, Bobby Bowden couldn't tell you if a player was green, white, purple, or black. It made no difference to him whatsoever. In addition to being such a great collegiate football coach, he was probably the greatest man I've ever met in my life that had such an influence, not only on me, but on thousands of young men that he coached throughout his career, a number of which came from single parent families. And he had a real knack for stepping in and actually serving as a surrogate father to you, in addition to maintaining his role as a coach as well. He was always concerned about you, not only your performance on the field, but how you were doing off the field as well. I'll tell you a real quick story about him. I'll never forget this. One time we'd had a hard practice and we were in a steam room, kind of shedding a few extra pounds, having a steam bath, and Coach Bowden came in and sat down beside me, and he said, "Mickey," he said, "how are things going with you?" And I said, "Well, they're going okay, Coach." He said, "Well," he said, "do you have any problems in your life that you need any help with?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, yeah." Now, keep in mind what a lot of people don't know. I had lost my parents in high school before I came to WVU, and Coach Bowden just stepped right in as a surrogate dad for me immediately. So he sat down. He said, "What kind of problems are you having? And anything I can help you with on a personal basis?" And I started to talk about a couple of things. He said, "Well, now stop." He said, "I want you to stop right there." I said, "Well, Coach, I thought you wanted to hear about these difficulties I was having." He said, "Well, I kind of sort of do," but he said, "You know what I'm interested in, Plumley?" He said, "I'm more interested in what's your solutions for those problems that you're having. And let's talk about how you're going to solve that particular situation." And it's just the type of a guy that he was. John, I noticed you're wearing his favorite curse word on your hat there today. The only curse word the man ever said in his life, and he made it up himself, "Dadgummit." And I mean, in 4 years there, I never heard a single curse word come out of the man's life, out of his mouth. Did you want to add something to that, John?
Well, I was
Looks
going to
like you
say,
do.
Tommy told me he actually swore. He said it was the only time I ever heard him swore. It was the halftime of the Boston College game. So let me tell you something. You got to be really playing bad, and you got to really stink up the stadium to get Coach Bowden to say a swear word. And it was probably hell or damn, I'm sure. But even to have Coach
Yeah.
Bowden say that would have been, you had to be playing poorly to have that happen. But, I wanted to make a point, too.
Oh, yeah.
And again, this is something. Again, Jim Carlin gave me a lot of insight into Bobby. And I think, there was kind of a good cop, bad cop there. And as you know, because you played for Coach Carlin, a lot of the guys, your contemporaries, and I know Bob Gresham, till the day Jim Carlin died, just could not function around him without being uptight. Here's a guy who played NFL football around a lot of elite coaches, but for whatever reason, Jim Carlin had that approach on some of those players because he was so no nonsense. I can remember, I think Garrett Ford was the one that told me the story. You guys had a curfew, and Coach Carlin would always tell the players, whatever time that curfew was, he said, "Listen, if you're not going to get a date by 10 o'clock, it's not happening for you. Get home, get back to your dorms or wherever you are, whatever it was." So Carlin was the disciplinarian. He handled team discipline. Bobby was the guy that was the players could go to. His office door was always open. He was approachable.
Exactly.
And that's usually the role that assistant coaches play. The head coach has got to be the disciplinarian.
Yeah.
He's got to be the one that makes all of the hard choices. Who's going to run the stadium steps? All of those things. So when Bobby became the head coach, that was one of the big transitions that he had to make, because he went from the guy who helped handle Mickey Plumlee's problems to the guy who had to oversee everything from 30,000 feet. And he had to let those assistant coaches do some of those things that he was doing before. And that took a while. I mean, it wasn't an immediate transition to be the type of coach that you needed to be the head coach. And I know that, a lot of people talk about the 72 Peach Bowl and the things that went on down there. I think, again, these are lessons that you learn, things that you had to do, transitioning from being an assistant coach to a head coach. And, again, this book is about personal growth and about development, about career development, about, making choices and experimenting and doing things. Some of the trick plays that he tried at West Virginia didn't work. But when he got to Florida State, the Bowden-Ruski against Clemson and all those things, the reverses and things, maybe he had a few better players. Maybe he picked the right time to do them. But those things that he tried at West Virginia that maybe didn't work, worked beautifully when he got to Florida State.
It certainly did. And you make a good point there, John. It was almost, with he and Coach Carlin, it was almost like a good cop, bad cop sort of relationship. Carlin was the guy you wanted to watch out for. You didn't want to cross. Coach Bowden was a guy you could always confide in. And if Coach Carlin was down on you, sometimes even unnecessarily, it's kind of like, if you go back to the movie, Remember the Titans, that is the type of relationship it was between, the head coach being Coach Carlin and the assistant coach with Coach Bowden. But I wanted to talk just a little bit about going beyond his role as just a coach, but his role as a Christian, his role as a mentor to young men, and the way that he had about himself of remembering people. There's an old saying, I forgot who said it, that people may not remember what you said, people may not remember what you did, but people will always remember how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. And that's what Coach Bowden was always good at, is making you feel like, you had potential, that you could do it. Faith, family, and football was a credo that he operated by, in that particular order. But just to give an example of the type of guy that he was, and I'm sure that he had this sort of relationship with hundreds, if not thousands, of players that played for him. I want to read you a letter here that I received from Coach Bowden, and this was in 2015, John and team. This was 45 years after I had played for the man. Got a letter from him in the mail, and it's dated August the 6th, 2015. And I had been stricken with esophageal cancer at the time, and somehow, some way, he found out about it. And I got this letter in the mail from him 45 years after I played for the man. It said, "Mickey, I just got word that you were very sick, and it concerned me. Ann and I will be praying for your recovery. You were always a fighter, and I know you'll fight this problem with all that you've got." It says, "I got up to WVU homecoming last season, and Ann and I were marshals in the homecoming parade. They've selected me to the WVU Hall of Fame, and I wish you can be there for the ceremony." And then he ends the letter with, "May the sun always enfold you," and sun is spelled S-O-N. Mm-hmm. Reflecting, his Christianity, Christianity beliefs. And then P.S. know that you are being prayed for. So, here it is, 45 years after I played for the man, I get a letter like that. And I'm sure that he took an equal concern in every player that ever played for him. Then 4 years later, in 2019, we had our 50th reunion, which you'll remember, John. We had our 50th reunion of the 69 Peach Bowl team. At the time, Coach Bowden was 92 years old. I called him down in Tallahassee, and I said, Coach, is there any way, anyhow, you think you might be able to get up to Morgantown for this 50th reunion of the '69 Peach Bowl team? And he said, well, let me check with Ann. And he checked with his wife for just 30 seconds. He says, we'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world. So he came and drove, had his daughter drive him all the way from Tallahassee up to Morgantown. And here's the part I'll never forget, John. He walked in. We had the reception on a Friday night. We had about maybe 38 guys show up for the reunion. Coach Bowden walks into the reception Friday night, and I'd swear on the Bible, if I had a Bible here with me, he not only knew the names of 90% of the guys in that room, probably 75% of us, he remembered our hometowns. And this was after thousands of players that he had coached. So I just wanted to make those points because it kind of goes beyond how people knew him as a coach. That's the kind of man he was.
Yeah, and along with the faith, that sword can swing both ways. And first of all, you have to live the life that you preach, which he did. But I think other things, I think the sincerity, and I think the fact that he treated everybody equally. I think, I don't know, maybe that's not the right word, but fair. I think he was a very fair man. And I think whatever you do in life, I think guys, whether you're an 18-year-old player, 22, 24, whatever, guys are pretty smart and they can see things. And when you practice something that you preach, it has a lot more meaning than if you just tell somebody you're going to do it. And I think Bobby lived the life that he preached. And I think that's important to know about him. And you brought up Ann. And I want to mention Ann because you talk about good cop, bad cop. Ann was very important to his career because, as Jim Carlin told me, Ann could be as tough as old boot leather when she had to be. And so I'm sure there were times, again, early in his career when he's still trying to figure things out, he's got a wife standing with him that was, first of all, extremely intelligent, very aware of things, and they were a terrific team throughout his entire career. I'm sure when he had to make tough decisions, he's sitting there with his wife, and I think his wife's helping him make the right ones. And I think that's important to mention. And again, what a great team. And you mentioned, you talk about the pit games, the worst game of his coaching career, and then the bookmark to have the win against them in '75 in his final season. What a perfect analogy of his career. He goes in and he was handed a great football team. For West Virginia standards, he was handed a really good football team. He had a great backfield. He had his starting quarterback back. He had a lot of established players. Had a terrific defensive player, Dale Farley, who was bigger than all the guys up front in front of him. It was, if Farley doesn't get hurt in the Duke game, I mean, tell that story. They tell the story. Here's the story. Joe Paterno had told Bobby Bowden, he said, you've got to in these early games, you got to play your starters a little bit more to get them seasoned. Well, that sounds good, but Penn State's got a lot more depth than West Virginia does. They got a lot more players, and they're able to absorb losses a little bit easier than West Virginia is. So Bobby had played Farley a little bit too long. I can't remember. It was the game before Duke, or maybe it was 2 games before Duke, and he tweaked his knee. And of course, you hurt your knee in 1970. It's not like you hurt your knee in 2026. There's a lot of things going on there, a lot of butchery going on and whatnot in terms of medicine that they don't have. So Farley tweaks his knee, and then they don't have him for the Pitt game. And what they needed in that Pitt game was a couple of big guys up front to stop the run, because that's all Pitt did. Is it in the second half? They got that they just decided we're going to go for it on 4th down. We're going to run every play, and they didn't have a play longer than 15 yards in that second half, and they came back and won that game. So you talk about a death by 1,000 cuts. So Bowden's decision to keep one of his star players into a meaningless game ended up costing him in a meaningful game. And again, it's one of those lessons that he learned as a coach early in his career, and mistakes that he made early in his career that he certainly didn't make later.
Fantastic. Oh, that's a
Exactly
great story. Right. Yeah. Mick, let's bring Matthew in so he can ask us questions of John. Take it away. Matthew, I've got the hat on, by the way.
Yeah, you got one. Is that the dadgummit hat?
That is.
That's
that
great.
is.
Those are hard to find.
Well, I'll tell you.
The secrecy on mine. The guy that got mine made, he made him for Florida State too. As you can see, there's the back of it there. And he told me, he said, I don't want you telling people because my wife doesnn know about this, and I don't want to spend a whole bunch. I don't want to buy the whole team hats. So
he's
told me the secrecy.
I got mine from essentially Mickey's line mate, Dickie Lee Roberts.
Okay. So there were more that were made. Yeah.
The good news is I was supposed to get a hat and a quart of Princeton hooch. Never got the hooch, but I got the hat. So that's fine. That's fine. Hey, Matthew, come in here and meet John Antonik.
Fire away.
Awesome. Let's do it. First of all, Mr. Antonik, it's super nice to meet you. And oh my gosh, there were so many things that you mentioned. And I love to talk about the faith with Bobby and everything that went along with him. But I'm going to start this thing out with a story back in high school. So my very last game that I played, my main sport that I played was basketball. Clearly, as you can tell, I would not have been anything but a corner in football. There's not much muscle mass going on in this place. So our coach sat us down in the locker room the very last game, and we had lost right before regional play going into – we didn't get to go to states. So he sits us down, and he tells us one thing. He says, fellas, he said, I understand that this season didn't go exactly how we wanted to. We only had about an 11-11 record. Very mediocre team. We would beat all the bad teams but lose to any of the good teams. But basically he told us, and he said, no matter what goes on in every one of y'all's lives, he said, I want you to remember that I am always here for you and to always call each other up whenever something goes wrong. And that's exactly how I remember our team in a nutshell. And I believe that's how you mentioned all the players and also Bobby as well. It's amazing to me the fact that they had such a chemistry. But do you believe it was how he was raised, or maybe his parents, maybe coaches that went on throughout his life? What made him the way that he was to be able to be such a team player and the coach that he was?
You know, that's a good question. I do know that when he was young, I think he had scarlet fever or rheumatic fever or one of those. And I know he was bedridden. And I know he used to follow World War II as a kid, and he would kind of plot things along as the advances, as they were advancing in Europe and so forth, and in the Pacific. So he kind of I think there was a year in his life, I think, where he was pretty much removed, didn't go to school. I know. So maybe that had a part of it. I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe it's just his personality and his makeup to be the way he was. But you're 100% right about his players. You know, they were so close knit, and these reunions. You mentioned the Peach Bowl reunion, and you talk about the other team reunions. That group is extremely close. They stay in touch. I know Randy Flincham did a great job in keeping guys connected through the years. And I think there was a certain amount of pride. And again, I can't speak for that era. Mickey would be better served to do that. But I think that when Don Nehlen had his success, they changed the logo, they changed the look. As Bobby told me, he said that he introduced Michigan to West Virginia. The way we dressed, the logo, the color scheme, everything, it was kind of Don Nehlen's program. And rightfully so. He was the head coach at the time. So I think that era before him maybe felt a little bit left out. I don't know. Again, that would be something that Mickey and those guys could answer. But there is a great amount of pride for what was accomplished during those years. And I know there was a great amount of pride and a feeling of gratitude for what Bobby accomplished in those ensuing years at Florida State. And for all the guys that I talked to, that was a theme. It's like, wow, here is Coach Bowden being considered one of the greatest coaches. And I think if you talk about maybe the 5 or 10 greatest coaches in NCAA history, he's in that discussion. What he did at Florida State from, I think, 85 through 2000 will never be duplicated by any coach. He won 2 national championships. He could have won 6. If he had a better kicker, a little bit better luck, he would have won probably half dozen titles like Nick did. The 10-win seasons, the years ranked in the top 5. No one will ever duplicate that again. And so I think the players that played for him and that were a part of that, I feel, we contributed to this, even though we're not at Florida State. We were a part of his journey and his path to become one of the greatest coaches in NCAA history.
That's awesome. Yeah. And obviously faith in Christ is a very important part of it, not only part of the game, but the way he lived his life. And you mentioned how he carried himself not only on the field, but also away with these players as well. And you don't have meetings or do things with your players outside of the field unless if you have that close connection with them. You don't have that.
No, you don't. And again, it has to be sincere and authentic.
Yes, it does.
You can say these things and you can talk about being a Christian man and living a Christian life, but you have to match it with deeds and actions. Yes. I think that's very important because guys are smart. They pick these things up pretty easily. Now, in Mickey's time, I used to argue with this with Steve Dunlap because Steve Dunlap went from a player to a coach. And so players back then only knew what the coaches tell them. Okay. It isn't like today where, you can, I don't want to say you can fool a player, but players only had so much access to so much information. It's different than it is today. And so that's one of the big different things that I think that happened then that it's not as easy to do today. And I want to make one other point about Coach Bowden. He was a tough football coach. And yes, he was a nice man. And yes, he was a Christian man. And yes, he was a jokester and all of that. But let me tell you something. He ran tough practices. And I know that when he was at Florida State, they had the mat drills. You had to be a man to get through preseason to get to Bobby's practices. And I'll tell you something else, and Rich Rodriguez told me this. The practices were not easy. And if let's just say you're in the middle of a scrimmage or something and there's a fight that breaks out, okay? Bobby wasn't blowing that whistle quickly because he wanted to see who was going to fight and who wasn't going to fight, and before he would break up the fight, because he wanted to know who's that guy, who am I going to count on in the fourth quarter when things are tough, and that guy that I need. He is always getting information. He's always compiling things and learning about his teams. So yes, he was a Christian man. He lived that way. Yes, he was a jokester. Yes, he was a nice man. Yes, he was accommodating to the media. The only media member that I know that he had a problem with was a guy in Wheeling, a guy named Cliff McWilliams, who wrote for the Wheeling Intelligencer. And I don't know where it emanated from. I think it came from that first season when he lost the game against Duke in Pitt. And he began referring to Bobby as Bobby Bowdown, which is petty. It's ridiculous. It's not. It's just. And Bobby, I can remember Dick Poland, who was the SID at the time, told me that Bobby had got him aside and said, listen, I am always going to be accommodating the media because they have the last word. The pen always, supersedes what you tell them. So I'll always be, but I don't want you helping that guy. I don't, that guy, because his attacks got personal. And it got beyond just, okay, the team played poorly or, this and that. And that was the only journalist that I know of, that I'm aware of in his entire coaching career, all those years, that he had a problem with. And, I think that's another facet of him. He was ahead of his time because guys like Bo Schembechler and Woody Hayes, and they were always kind of had the media at arm's length. And Bobby understood that game and knew that you have to foster those relationships and cultivate them and that they'll help you. And throughout his career, he always got the benefit of the doubt because he never turned down an interview, and whatever you needed, he did it until it was completed. And while I'm thinking about this, I want to tell you this quick story about Coach Bowden. I think this demonstrates him to a T. Mm-hmm. The last game of his career was against West Virginia in the Gator Bowl. I worked at West Virginia, obviously, in a different role than I work today, but I was a part of the university communications staff. Michael Fergale was the communications director, assistant athletic director, and all of that. And so we had these joint just like functions where we'd have Florida State and West Virginia there. So, and people knew this from West Virginia, and they knew this was going to be Bobby's last game, and this is a future Hall of Fame coach. Get some things signed. So there was this huge mountain of West Virginia gear, helmets, jerseys, ephemera, all these different things that Michael Fergale, that's not his job. His job is communications. Had all of these things here stacked on a table that he was asked to get signed, by people above him, donors and whatnot. So he was totally mortified and embarrassed. And so Coach Bowden had finished the part of the function that he was doing and got him off the side. And Michael says, "Coach, I hate to ask you this," he said, "but there are a bunch of people here that would love for you to sign all of these things that are over here on the table. Would you be willing to do it?" And he looked at it and he goes, "Wow, that's a lot of stuff." He says, man, I got to get to practice. So that's just too much stuff. So then he thought about it and he said, "Okay, give me a pen." So he gets the pen and he starts signing all this stuff. And I'm telling you, it was literally, there might have been 100 items there. And I don't know, it may have taken him, 15, 20 minutes. So he starts signing them all and he gets finished and he looks up and he goes, "Is that all you have?" That's Bobby Bowden.
That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful.
Great story.
Beautiful. That is a great story.
That's incredible.
That's a great story.
You don't get any better than that when you have somebody that is truly kind on and off the field. And I know you keep mentioning it, you've said it, so I'm not going to beat the dead horse and move on to the next thing, but I absolutely love that about him. And even though I never knew him personally, just being able to hear stories of guys like that and how much of an impact they make around West Virginia University and other places as well, like Florida State, that is so important. But I'm going to lead you into this next question that I thought was very interesting because I don't know exactly how they used to play back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s. So nowadays, in midway through 2026, there's not a lot of quarterbacks that are calling the play calls. And you mentioned something about half an hour ago that's what he did. That's what he did, was he called the plays as the quarterback, and that's what he was brought into West Virginia to do. What exactly gave the coach the authority, gave him the knack to say, you know what, I'm going to trust you with the reins to this offense, and I'm going to step back. I'm going to let you do your thing?
Jim Carlin. Jim Carlin, he hired good coaches. He had a good defensive coordinator. He had good position coaches. He told me, he said, I'm going to coach the special teams and I'm going to coach the third teamers. That's going to be me, and I'm going to let these guys coach and do their thing. And when Bobby became the head coach, Frank Signetti was the offensive coordinator. And I can remember Frank Signetti telling me a story. When they would go either on the road or when they would stay at the hotel before the games, Bobby liked to watch the 11 o'clock news. And then after the 11 o'clock news, he would go down to Frank Signetti's room and they would have a mirror or a grease board. And if Frank was the play caller, and they would go through and they would plot on the field exactly what they were going to do. So he would do a kickoff. They'd start at their own 12. Okay, Frank, what's your play call here? It's 2nd and 6. What are you calling here on the left hash? What are you calling here on the right hash? Okay, he would go through all of these different scenarios and they would plot their way down the field, and Frank would have to justify the calls. This is what I'm doing in this situation. This is what we're doing. Bobby was ahead of his time. And I guess Bill Walsh had that book, where, you scripted and you did all. Bobby was doing that well before it was known in common practice. He was scripting plays and going through and doing all of that. And I remember a story that Tommy told me. This was later on when he coached at Florida State. They were playing Oklahoma State in a bowl game. And so Tommy was the GA at the time. And, Bobby was a horrible driver. I know I could tell you stories about Bobby, what a terrible driver he was. And so the driver taking him to the game, Bobby's sitting in the passenger side, and he just out of the blue says, I think I'm going to throw it on every play in the first quarter. And Tommy's sitting in the back going, what do you mean? What happens if you're backed up on your own two and it's whatever the third, whatever. And he said, I'm just going to wing it. That's just another story about Bobby Bowden. Here is a guy who was a planner and who scripted things out and would go through and do all these thorough things, on the grease board or what with his coordinator. And at the same time, he was a riverboat gambler. He would do things like that were unconventional. So you could never really always fully get a read on when he started here at West Virginia. He had a passing game. He had probably one of the fastest teams in the country. I remember, I think they said Florida, Arizona State, and then West Virginia, when you had Danny Buggs and you had Marshall Mills and you had Harry Snake Blake and you had all these track guys that he had. And they had Bernie Galiffa who could throw the ball, so they threw the ball. Well, at the end of his career, he had a big offensive line. He had running backs. He didn't have a lot of receivers. He ran the ball. He did what he had to do with the players that he had. And again, it goes back to this theme of being resourceful, of knowing your team, of understanding your personnel, of understanding the limits that you have in your organization and working around those. Listen, any team in the country, I don't care what team it is, whether it's Ohio State or which teams have the best budgets or whatnot, everybody has something, whatever their problems are. And you have to figure out what those problems are, and you have to identify them, and then you have to accentuate your strengths and work around your weaknesses. And again, it's a story of growth, of a man who, he was another fact here. I don't think people realize Bobby was older than Jim Carlin. Here was the guy that was older than the head coach, coached a little bit longer than Jim did, and a guy who was getting to the prime of his life. And, if you look at some of the coaches that have achieved great things, it surely happens before your age 46 when he left West Virginia. So again, I drive home that point that the great things that he accomplished in his life or when everybody else is retiring. It's just incredible what he did.
Yeah. Let's bring Mick back, and I'm looking at the clock here. It's getting close to 8, but we can talk about John, but Mickey played for him. He was the offensive coordinator when Mickey was on the offensive line. So, Mick, we'll bring you back in for the last few questions.
Well, John, I want to thank you personally for having written the book about Coach Bowden. I've got my copy here, and
awesome.
Thoroughly good read there. A very, very accurate description of what he was like, not only as a coach, but also as a man. I don't, you mentioned 10 or 11 books have been published about him, but I don't think any of them really went into the personal side of it the way that yours did. So I just wanted to thank you personally for getting the story out about Coach Bowden. I only have one question. Why did you decide to name the book Almost Heaven?
Well, obviously a play on words, right? A Christian man, almost heaven. He almost achieved greatness here. Didn't quite. Had some good teams, not great teams. So wordplay, as you mentioned, it's a little play on words. And I wanted to write this book because I wanted to tell the West Virginia part of it. In the other books, again, his life story is more than just what he did at Florida State. And all of those steps that he took to get to where he is or where he was, I think were important. I think that's important to the story. And I wanted to talk to the people that were close to him, like Garrett Ford. I worked with Garrett Ford for years, and I would hear all these stories that he would tell me about the time he went over to eat. See, Bobby had to get Garrett Ford. He was an extremely important player for Bobby Bowden being the offensive coordinator because Garrett was one of the few black players. And Garrett was a Northeastern black player, which is different than a Southern black player. Okay. Garrett had an awareness of a lot of the political things that were going on. Okay. And they knew, John Mallory and Garrett Ford knew that Bobby had never coached a black player. And when Bobby would say boy, that raised their antenna, and it was totally innocent, and it was totally, it didn't have malice. That's just the way he talked. But to a Northeastern black man in the 1960s to say, boy, that gets your antenna up. So Bobby had to get Garrett Ford on his side. And so he invited him over for dinner, literally made him come and eat dinner with his family. And Garrett said, he didn't want to go. He didn't want to do it. But Bobby had to win him over because Garrett was one of the better players that he was inheriting, and brought him over. And he said, by the end of the night, he said, Ann was such a great cook. He said, Bobby was such a, his personality will win you over. He said, I'm bouncing Terry on. Terry's just a little boy. I'm bouncing him on his knee, and Tommy's on another knee. And he said, I just fell in love with him there. And one other point I wanted to make about that too, about the racial makeup of the team. And this is something that I have to give Jim Carlin credit for. There was a rule that you guys had about rooming on the road. Okay. Position players roomed with position players. Is that right, Mickey? Okay. Well,
that's correct.
Garrett Ford, wanted to room with John Mallory. Okay. John Mallory was not Garrett Ford's position. I think the backup might have been Ben Seegre, whoever it was. Okay. And so Garrett went to Carlin and said, hey, I want to room with John Mallory. And Jim just says, we're not going to do that. You're going to room with your position. He said, and Jim turned it around on Garrett and said, what if I told you had to room with John Mallory? And Garrett thought about that and goes, okay, all right, it made sense. Those guys understood, they understood what was required of them. They understood the makeup of the team. They understood the dynamics. And again, these are lessons. These are things that are building towards the greatness that they achieved and accomplished later in their life. So again, that's the reason I wrote this book, was because I wanted to tell the West Virginia story. I wanted to talk about the growth that he had as a coach. I also wanted to incorporate things that happened during that time, because not only did those guys grow as coaches, this department grew as an athletic department. Okay. The university grew, it was confined to one campus. It was expanding to Evansdale. There was a lot of things that were going on in West Virginia University at this time. And the net of it is, in the whole thing, and I guess the way to wrap this up, we became a better school because of Bobby Bowden, and Bobby Bowden became a better coach because of West Virginia University.
West Virginia. Well said. Very well said.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, John, thanks again. We certainly appreciate you coming on. Frank, are we going to try to wrap up here with a little overview of the offensive line, or you want to find a word in there, John?
Make sure if you get on Amazon, and you can Google it right now, they're available on Amazon. You can just type in Bobby Bowden or my name, and they're available. You can also your local bookstore. If you've got an independent bookstore, support your local bookstore. I think bookstores are a wonderful resource for your community. I know there's a lot of things that go on in your bookstores beyond just going to buy a book. And so I always encourage people to go to their local bookstore.
Yeah. John, I can't tell you for the team how much we appreciate. You're a busy guy. And, the best for me, the best sports books are books that do exactly what you did. It's history, it's personal development, it's growth. You can relate. And, as far as I'm concerned in the sports business, no better storyteller than John Antonik. So, John, this is your fourth visit. We hope we can have you back again and again and again. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Great. Let's bring Mickey
Take care,
back
John.
up. Boy,
Thank
I'll tell you,
appreciate it.
that great
John.
guy,
Appreciate it.
great book about a wonderful time. And he's right. I mean, when you look at it, there are points in the history of people's evolution, institutions' evolution, but in this case, the two converged. I think that's a great way to listening to Bobby Bowden at the beginning of the interview, and then what John said at the end just makes a lot of sense.
Yep. Yeah, really a symbiotic relationship between Coach Bowden and West Virginia that'll endure forever.
Yeah, and you lived through it. You were part of the story.
Well, and blessed to have been, Frank. Blessed to have
Yeah.
been part of it. The man had such an influence on my life and my teammates' lives, and
That's
everyone
right.
he coached. Just never forget the guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Well, as you mentioned it, we're going to do a pirouette here for the few minutes we have left, about 15 minutes. We'll bring Matthew in a few seconds here. We started last week by starting to look at the WVU rooms. We do then and now we're going to do now that need to improve if the Mountaineers are going to improve as a squad. No question. And we started with wide receivers. Big thumbs up last week when we looked at who's playing and what the two deep looks like. This week, we're going to look at the offensive line. The information we're going to show, and I'm sure a number of the fans out there watching know this, but when it's on one piece of paper and you're looking at it, and you can see we're going to focus really on the impact of one recruiting year, 2026, both the freshman recruiting, which was ranked 20th in the country, and the portal recruiting for last year was ranked 21st. And then look at how those players are populating the two deep coming up in the 26th season. And it is beyond impressive. It's beyond impressive in the sense that what you're going to be seeing is, I think, the turnaround of West Virginia's football team. Darren, can you throw up the chart? And we'll do a quick overview of that. I can't see it. It may be up there, but I can't see it. There it is. Something happened to my screen, so I've got to do this with it. And there it is. Let me just give a quick overview, and then we'll turn to Matthew first, and then Mickey, who obviously has a vested interest in the position that he played. By the way, John named him to the all 1960s team, so his voice is worth a lot. They're the freshman recruits, and those double asterisks are not only the players they brought in, but the players that you'll find at the bottom in the depth chart, and you'll see that a whole bunch of these freshmen and portal grabs are already in the 1-2. And if you look particularly at the top two under freshmen, they rank high in the country. Kevin Brown, second at his position, and second in the overall, and third in the state, second in the position. And then you look at Deshaun Woods, number 5 at his position, and then 7th in the state. And you can go down the list. And then you look at the portal recruits, and you look at players like Amari Grayson, and you look where they came, 2 guys from Jackson State, and they're walking in now to play for their former offensive line coach, who's now our offensive line coach. And then you've got 3 guys in a row that came from all over the country, from Wyoming, from Yukon, from K-State. We talked about Devin Voss earlier this year as being one of the big grabs. And the bottom line is 6 out of the 10 two deeps of the positions guard, center, tackle come from the work that Rich Rod and his staff did last year. Only 4 came before that. So let me stop there and turn to you first, Matthew, for your observations, and then we'll go to Mick for his.
Awesome. Well, there's a couple big things that I could take away from this. One of the main things is with Rick Trickett coming in as the offensive man, calling the play calls for the offensive line this year, we're going to see a lot of zone-heavy running coming on this season. Now, I know we spoke about quarterbacks a bunch last week, but right now I'm going to focus especially on the run scheme. So what West Virginia is going to be looking at a lot this season is zone scheme blocking. Now, what does that mean exactly? So normally you have a lot of players that will have their specific man right in front of them, and they're going to block whoever it is, block that guy in front of them. In a zone blocking scheme, they're going to block a certain zone that they're supposed to be beside. Now, could that be that man that's in front of them? Absolutely. But most of the time, they're going to be moving over a little bit towards the side to try to open up gaps in the run game, maybe give the quarterback some running room in a gap, whether it's the A, B, or C gap. It just depends on what the offensive play call is for the time being. But I'm extremely excited about this. Rick Trickett ran a lot of zone back at Jacksonville State. I believe it was 75% run. So very, very, very heavy run-oriented. But I'm still very excited about this, especially with all the additions that we have. So at left tackle, which is the most important position if you have a right-handed quarterback, right tackle, most important position with a left-handed quarterback. At left tackle, we have Karsten Cassidy, a junior. We have Deshaun Woods coming in as a senior, and then Jonas Muya, freshman. So we have a pretty deep, little bit of a deep left tackle room. A little bit nervous if we have an injury or two go on, but we do have that younger guy in Muya, which I'm very excited about, by the way. At right tackle, we have Malik Agbo, who is coming in as well, Kevin Brown, the freshman, and also Rhett Morris is a freshman as well. So very, very, very young at right tackle. But I think that's going to be good to develop in the latter years. And also, we mentioned this last week with 3-star recruits and 4-star recruits, because West Virginia is not going to get a bunch of those 5-star recruits. And to be honest with you, I think that's okay. Because if you can have guys like Kevin Brown and Rhett Moore stay in the program for a couple of years, I think we're going to have some really, really, really exciting moves come to WVU if we can keep those guys to stay for 2 or even 3 years. And maybe we can get them to the NFL. So let's see what happens, but I'm extremely excited for the running scheme that's going to be happening here in 2026 at West Virginia University. Let's go.
Great analysis, Mick. This must be, your heart must be going pitter-patter, because as an offensive lineman, it's been tough watching these games over the last couple of years. But this group, not only is potential there, but it would be a shock if there wasn't performance that followed.
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you, Frank, I really got excited when we decided to focus on the offensive line this week. Huge changes. I broke it down into 3 different areas. Number one, we have a change in leadership, a big change in physicality, secondly, and thirdly, a huge change in experience on the offensive line. First of all, from a leadership perspective, bringing in Rick Trickett to replace Jack Bicknell. Not that Bicknell was a bad coach, but Trickett's just got a wonderful record as an O-line coach. He's had a lot of success. Mm-hmm. He knows the kind of scheme that Rich Rod wants to run based on working with him at Jack State. So from a leadership perspective, we got a huge change there. So we went back and took a look at some of the stats from last year. And we gave up 31 sacks in 2025, which was third most in the Big 12 that were given up. I think only Oklahoma State and Colorado gave up more sacks than we gave up last year. Mm-hmm. And we were 13th in the running game last year in the conference. So I think we averaged 3.2 yards per game. So, you look at that and not a very good record, at all. Part of the reason for that, I think, leads me in, the second and third points, physicality and experience. I went back I took a look at the guys that were playing on the offensive line in 2025 and the number of snaps that they had under their belt going into the 2025 season. So last year, our offensive line had 1,976 plays that the entire offensive line had participated in going into the season, just shy of 2,000 plays. This year, the players that we picked up from the portal, along with the returning players that are on the roster, you can almost triple that number. This
awesome.
year, these guys have a total of 5,525 offensive plays under their belt going into the season. So you're looking at a group of players that are far, far more experienced than we had last year. You could say the experience is almost tripled. Also, the physicality. Last year, we just did not have, the size that it takes to compete at the Power 4 level. No question about it. This year, we've got 10 players that are over 300 pounds. Plus, you got Kevin Brown coming as a freshman. He was listed at 280. Wouldn't surprise me by the opening kickoff if he isn't tipped the scales at 300 the way I've watched him in the workout program. So we're going from a situation where last year, actually 3 of the 5 starters we had on the offensive line last year each had less than 250 plays or snaps under their belt. This year, you can replace that with players that have multi-year starting roles from the transfer portal. Now, I'll start with Wes King, who I think is going to be the best addition for us from the transfer portal. Coming out of Wyoming, he'll be a senior this year, but all told, in his playing career so far, he's had 1,750 plays that he personally has participated in. And here's the really, really outstanding part. Wes has not given up a single sack in 1,750 plays.
That is
as
incredible.
A starter.
That
so
sounds like a Zach Frazier.
Oh, it is, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, that's a stat you just don't hear these days. Then you got Amari Grayson. You got Amari Grayson that's coming in through the portal from Jack State. Very familiar with the system, with the offensive scheme. He's played under Coach Trickett. And he almost matches Wes. He's had over 1,700 plays that he's participated in as well. So you got those 2 guys. Then we picked up a fella by the name of Karsten Cassidy from Connecticut, from UConn. He's got about almost 1,200 plays under his belt. He also, in his career, has never allowed a sack. So we got 2 players, and I hope they do not change that up this point. Also, we picked up Cameron Griffin, who was an all-conference USA player at his position. He's got slightly less than 1,000 snaps. He's probably going to be used as a utility player because he can play any of 3 interior line positions, which is important. Coach Rich Rod made the comment in one of his pressers earlier that, you can't win in the Big 12 or any league if you only have 5 or 6 really good offensive linemen. No. With the way injuries are these days, you've got to have 9, 10, or 11 to really be, successful in what you're doing. So in addition to what's going on there in the transfer portal, just an amazing turnaround I think we can expect to see in the performance of the offensive line. And then we've got Kevin Brown coming in as a freshman who, is projected to be a starter. I think he probably will be. They're taking Nick Crahy and moving him from tackle over to left guard to strengthen up that backside for the right-handed quarterback. And it wouldn't surprise me, even as a freshman, if you don't see Brown and Crahy side by side over there on the left hand side of the ball. That's yet to be determined. And then Landon Livingston, who was playing center, started last year. They're actually transitioning him into more of a depth backup role so that he can be a fill-in for any of those people that may, let's hope not, but may get injured throughout the course of the season. So not only do we have a wealth of experience, brand new leadership, and some physicality to go with it, but I know we're talking about the offensive line, but to that, you take a guy like Cam Cook that we brought in as a runner, and you got the horses up front now that can open a line for him. Mm-hmm. And then you got big old Caden Luke coming to you out of Arizona. Could he be the next runaway beer truck? A lot of people think he very will be. So you take that revamped offensive line, new leadership, lots of physicality, lots of experience. You got a fullback, a true fullback, like Cowboy Luke, as they call him, blocking for Cam. And I think the ground game's going to look pretty good this year, and the pass protection should be much, much improved over what it was last year.
Yeah.
And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Wow, you guys are nails. Great analysis. And what you're doing is reinforcing, because I'm hearing it for the first time as you guys analyzed it, that you look at what you hope the coach will do when he comes in with his staff. A lot of talk, but then you look for what is the action, what's happening. And this is just an incredible progress. Now it's still on paper, but when you look at the talent we have, as you guys mentioned, and what we want to do, it's to me, it's going to be, again, I'm going to be shocked if it doesn't pay off. With these players, it's going to be unbelievable. So, Matthew, let's bring you in for your final comments before we move on, and also we'll bring Mick back in after that for his final comments, and then we'll talk about next week.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, first thing, and one thing that stands out to me the most out of everything that we've talked about with the offensive line room is whenever Mickey was talking about Landon Livingston, he's right now on third string on the center depth chart. And he was a starter last year. He was getting a bulk of the minutes. That's absolutely vital and goes to show you how much work that Rich Rodriguez and all the coaches have done over the offseason, recruiting and bringing these players in. That's absolutely massive. Second thing, if you combine this offensive line group with the wide receivers, me and Frank spoke about last week, we are going to be golden this year. Now, obviously, all this is on paper, but if we even have half of these guys pan out, it's going to be such a much better offensive season than we had last year because we've already got Cam Cook in the backfield and he's ready to go. Now, judging by Madden's score of him giving a 94, that's pretty nice on the Madden scores, if I do say so myself. So if he plays that good, we're going to be just fine this year. But I think it's going to be a great season to be a Mountaineer. And, let's do this thing. I'm so excited and hyped up for the season.
Excellent. And so far, so good in terms of reviewing those two rooms. Anybody who's watched the Mountaineers for the last 5 years or so knows that defense, particularly the defensive backfield, has to improve when the other team has the ball.
Yes.
And it's been a letdown time after time. So next week, we'll look at cornerbacks and safeties, and hopefully we'll come to the same conclusions that we have the last 2 weeks, this week and last week, about wide receivers and also the offensive line. Mick, your final thoughts before we do a pirouette and say goodnight.
Well, again, as I'll open with, just anxious to get things on the road here. Let's get going. Practice will start here in another 7 to 8 days or so. And just can't wait for September the 5th to roll around here and get rid of those feelings that you get in the pit of your stomach, those butterflies, get out there, get the first lick in, and get this season underway. Can't wait.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No question about it. Well, let's talk about next week. We had a great guest. We always have great guests, but John was superb. I just sent him a thank you note on our behalf. Next week, we're going to actually stick with that same era. We're going to have Kim West on the show. Kim was a backup quarterback in 1970, the year after Mickey left. And you'll see on the right, he's number 15 there. Played behind Mike Sherwood, the great Mike Sherwood, whom we've had on the show. And then on the right, he was also a great Mountaineer baseball player and played professionally. And he and I had an exchange about it because I grew up in a town called Batavia, New York, that was the New York-Pennsylvania League, and he played for Niagara Falls in the same league. Sadly, the New York Penn League doesn't exist anymore, but it did back in the day. And when I was growing up, I would go every night in the summer when they were home. They were a Pirates farm team, and so I got to see Manny Sanguillen. Pete Rose played for the Geneva Reds. It was just a feeder system, single A. You know, it's amazing to me that Kim is going to be able to be with us because he was in Spain during the World Cup. So the fact that he was able to get out of the country, or that any pilots were sober enough to fly him out of the country, is amazing. He left on the 19th, the day they won the World Cup. So he'll talk about that. So we're pleased to have Kim West with us. Next week, he's living on the West Coast now. And before we leave, and again, we don't get compensated for this, we always want to say thank you to the good people at Colasante's, Anthony, and also to Jerry and Doug at Kegler's. They're our go-to places. They've hosted us for remotes, as we say every week, and it's just a way of saying thank you. If you live in Morgantown or you're visiting, you're going to go to either of those or both. You could do that in the same day, one lunch, one dinner, because we do that too. So hopefully we'll have Greg back with us next week. But Mickey, it's always great working with you. Matthew, thank you for being here. And also Darren, who does all the work behind the scenes. This is Frank Fear from Mountaineer Locker Room Then and Now. Thank you for watching, and have a great week. And we'll see you right back here, 7 p.m. Eastern, next Wednesday night. Take care, everyone.